Have you ever witnessed a moment so utterly cruel it made your blood boil? Picture a freezing Tuesday evening inside Chicago's most exclusive, snobby restaurant. A frail, poorly dressed, elderly woman trips and collapses hard on the marble floor. Instead of rushing to help, the city's wealthiest elite point, whisper, and actually laugh at her pain. But they didn't know the fragile woman bleeding on the pristine tiles was Isabella Moretti, the fiercely protected mother of the city's most ruthless, untouchable crime boss. One struggling waitress dared to break the rules to help her. What happened next completely destroyed the restaurant's arrogant hierarchy and changed her life forever. The chandeliers at Le Ciel didn't just illuminate the dining room. They seemed to pass judgment on anyone who walked beneath them. Located in the heart of Chicago's wealthiest district, the restaurant was a fortress of exclusivity. A single steak here cost more than what Daisy Bennett made in an entire week of grueling shifts. Daisy adjusted her starched white apron, her fingers aching from the biting cold of the winter air outside and the relentless pace of the dinner rush inside. She was 24, exhausted, and running on nothing but black coffee and the desperate need to pay her younger sister's mounting hospital bills. Every night, she served people who wore watches worth her entire life's trajectory. She poured $1,000 bottles of wine for men who wouldn't even look her in the eye. At table 4 sat Eric and Beatrice Pendleton, a couple notorious for their sprawling real estate empire and their utter disdain for the service industry. "Garçon!" Eric barked, snapping his thick fingers in Daisy's direction. He didn't even use the right term, let alone look up from his phone. "This Wagyu is lukewarm. Take it back, and tell the chef if he wants to cook like a peasant, he should open a diner." "Right away, Mr. Pendleton," Daisy said, keeping her voice perfectly level, a customer service smile plastered onto her face. She picked up the plate, careful not to let her trembling hands betray her exhaustion. As she turned toward the kitchen, the heavy oak and brass front doors of Le Ciel swung open. A violent gust of freezing January wind howled into the pristine, climate-controlled foyer, bringing with it a flurry of snow and the bitter chill of the streets. The maitre d', a perpetually sneering man named Gregory, was busy scolding a busboy in the back. Because the front was briefly unguarded, someone walked in. It wasn't a celebrity, a politician, or a tech billionaire. It was an elderly woman. She looked entirely out of place, like a faded black and white photograph dropped into a high-definition movie. She wore a heavy, moth-eaten wool coat that had seen better decades, an oversized grey scarf wrapped tightly around her thin neck, and scuffed, sensible black boots. She was small, frail-looking, and shivering violently. Her silver hair was messy from the wind, and she looked deeply disoriented, blinking against the harsh, brilliant light of the crystal chandeliers. The dining room went dead silent. The clinking of silver against porcelain stopped. The low hum of pretentious conversations vanished. Daisy paused, the plate of rejected Wagyu in her hands, watching the old woman take a hesitant step forward. The marble floor near the entrance was slick with melted snow from the boots of the elite. As the old woman took her second step, her scuffed boot found the puddle of water. It happened in agonizing slow motion. Her foot shot out from under her. She let out a sharp, breathless gasp as her fragile frame twisted in the air. She hit the unforgiving Italian marble floor with a sickening thud. The sound echoed through the cavernous dining room. Her head struck the corner of a heavy brass coat rack, and she crumpled into a heap, motionless. Daisy's heart leapt into her throat. She expected the dining room to erupt into a panic. She expected the well-heeled doctors, lawyers, and CEOs sitting at the tables to rush forward to assist a bleeding, elderly woman. Instead, someone snickered. Good Lord, Beatrice Pendleton muttered loudly, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. Did a homeless shelter empty out down the street? Gregory, where is the staff? Eric Pendleton chuckled, a low, cruel sound. Looks like the trash blew in with the wind. Careful, Beatrice. Don't look too closely. You might catch something. A ripple of laughter washed through the room. It wasn't the boisterous laughter of a joke. It was the sharp, elitist scoff of people who found poverty and suffering to be a mere inconvenience to their dining experience. Men in bespoke suits pointed. Women in diamond chokers shook their heads in disgust. Daisy stood frozen for exactly 2 seconds. Then, the old woman moved, letting out a weak, agonizing groan. Blood was beginning to pool on the pristine white marble beneath her silver hair. "Hey!" Daisy yelled, shocking herself as her voice cut through the murmurs. She slammed the plate of Wagyu down on the nearest empty table, not caring that the fine china clattered dangerously. She sprinted across the dining room, her non-slip shoes squeaking against the floor. "What are you doing?" hissed Sylvia Sterling, the restaurant's general manager, emerging from the shadows of the wine cellar. Sylvia was a terrifying woman whose entire personality was built on catering to the rich and crushing her employees. "Daisy! Get back to your section. Let security throw her out." Daisy ignored her. She slid to her knees beside the old woman, completely indifferent to the fact that her crisp uniform was soaking up the dirty, freezing snow water on the floor. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" Daisy asked, her voice trembling but gentle. The old woman slowly opened her eyes. They were a piercing, stormy grey, sharp and intelligent despite the haze of pain. She blinked up at Daisy, a thin trickle of blood running down her pale forehead. My leg," the old woman whispered, her voice raspy and thick with a slight, unidentifiable European accent. "And my head. It spins." "Don't move," Daisy instructed softly. She reached into her apron, pulled out a stack of pristine, embroidered linen napkins, the kind that cost $50 each, and pressed them gently against the cut on the old woman's head. "Ugh, absolutely revolting," came a voice from a nearby table. "She's getting blood on the floor. Manager, we are trying to eat." Daisy looked up, her eyes blazing with an anger she usually kept tightly bottled up. She glared at the sneering faces of the city's elite. "She's an old woman, and she's bleeding. What is wrong with all of you?" The dining room gasped collectively at her audacity. A waitress? Speaking to them like that? It was unthinkable. Sylvia marched over, her high heels clicking furiously against the marble like a metronome, ticking down the final seconds of Daisy's career. Her face was flushed red with rage. "Daisy Bennett!" Sylvia snarled quietly, crouching down just enough to whisper venomously into Daisy's ear. "Get away from that vagrant right now. You are humiliating this establishment. You are ruining the ambiance. Step away or you are fired." Daisy looked at Sylvia. She looked at the sharp, furious eyes of her manager, a woman who cared more about the aesthetic of a dining room than a human life. Then she looked down at the fragile woman shivering on the floor. The woman's bony hand reached out, her frail fingers weakly gripping Daisy's wrist. Her grip was surprisingly warm. Daisy thought of her sister, lying in a sterile hospital bed across town. She thought of the eviction notices piling up on her kitchen counter. She desperately needed this job. The tips here were the only thing keeping her afloat. If she got fired, she would lose everything. But as the old woman's stormy grey eyes locked onto hers, Daisy made her choice. Some lines simply couldn't be crossed. "Fire me then," Daisy said, her voice dropping to a low, steady timbre. "But I'm not leaving her," Sylvia gasped, recoiling as if she had been slapped. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Daisy said, turning her attention back to the woman. "I need some ice. Bradley!" she shouted to the busboy who was hovering nervously nearby. "Get me a first aid kit and a glass of water." Bradley, terrified of Sylvia, but spurred by Daisy's tone, darted toward the kitchen. "You are done," Sylvia hissed, standing up straight. "You are completely done in this city, Daisy. I will make sure you never work in hospitality again. Security, remove this trash, and take the ex-waitress with her." Two large security guards in black suits stepped forward, looking hesitant. "Don't touch her," Daisy snapped, wrapping her arms around the old woman's shoulders and helping her sit up. The woman winced, letting out a sharp breath, but she managed to stabilize herself against Daisy's side. "I am quite all right," the old woman said softly. Her voice, previously frail, suddenly carried a strange, heavy authority. She looked around the dining room, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of the laughing patrons, the cruel manager, and finally settling on Daisy. "You have a good heart, child." "Let's get you up," Daisy said, ignoring the security guards. She slipped her arm under the woman's waist and slowly hoisted her to her feet. The old woman leaned heavily on her, favoring her right leg. "I said, get them out," Sylvia shouted, losing her composed veneer. Daisy practically carried the old woman through the vestibule and out the heavy front doors. The blast of freezing air hit them instantly. Daisy didn't hesitate. She unbuttoned her own thick winter coat from the coat-check rack and draped it over the old woman's trembling shoulders. "We need to get you to a hospital," Daisy said, reaching into her pocket for her phone. "I'm calling an ambulance." "No," the old woman said, placing a cold, firm hand over Daisy's phone. "No hospitals. No police. I will be fine." "But your head is bleeding." "It is a scratch," the old woman replied calmly. She reached into her pocket and pulled out an old, heavy flip phone. She pressed a single button and put it to her ear. "I am at the front of the restaurant," she said in Italian, her voice crisp. "I had a fall. Come." She snapped the phone shut and looked at Daisy. The cold wind was biting at Daisy's arms in her thin white uniform blouse, but she didn't leave the woman's side. "Why did you do that?" the old woman asked, pulling Daisy's coat tighter around herself. "You lost your job for me." "A stranger." Daisy let out a bitter laugh, wrapping her arms around herself to stay warm. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because I couldn't stand looking at those people for 1 second longer. Nobody deserves to be laughed at when they're hurt." The old woman tilted her head, studying Daisy intensely. It was a deeply analytical gaze, one that stripped away pretense. "What is your name, my dear?" "Daisy." "Daisy," the woman repeated, rolling the name around. "I am Isabella." "It's nice to meet you, Isabella. Are you sure you don't want me to call an ambulance? Do you have family coming? A son? A daughter?" "My son is coming," Isabella said smoothly. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. "He is very protective of me. Perhaps too much. I merely wanted to take a walk, to see the city without his shadows following me. It seems my balance is not what it used to be." Before Daisy could ask what she meant by shadows, the deafening roar of a massive engine echoed down the street. A sleek, jet-black armored SUV rounded the corner at a terrifying speed. It didn't park gracefully. It screeched to a halt right in front of the restaurant, completely blocking the valet lane. The tires smoked slightly against the icy asphalt. Before the car even fully stopped, all 4 doors flew open. 4 men stepped out. They were wearing immaculate, expensive dark suits, but they didn't look like the businessmen inside the restaurant. They were massive, broad-shouldered, and moved with a synchronized, predatory grace. The maitre d', Gregory, stepped outside to yell at them for blocking the valet. "Hey, you can't park that hearse here. Move it or I'm calling a tow." One of the men, a giant with a scar running through his left eyebrow, simply turned his head and looked at Gregory. He didn't say a word. He just stared. Gregory instantly turned pale, swallowed his words, and backed slowly into the restaurant, terrified. Daisy felt her heart pound. Who were these people? The man with the scar rushed over to Isabella, his terrifying demeanor melting into absolute panic. "Mamma," he said in rapid Italian, reaching out to support her. "Are you hurt? Who did this? Did someone touch you?" "Hush, Luca, I tripped." Isabella scolded him lightly in English, waving him off. "I am old, not helpless, though my head aches." Luca looked at Daisy, his dark eyes instantly narrowing with suspicion and hostility. He stepped between Daisy and Isabella, his hand subtly moving toward the inside of his suit jacket. "Who is this?" he growled. "Down, Luca," Isabella commanded. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the icy air like a whip. Luca instantly lowered his head and stepped back, though he kept a vigilant eye on Daisy. Isabella turned back to the freezing waitress. She reached out and gently patted Daisy's cold cheek. "You gave up your livelihood to help an old woman bleeding on the floor," Isabella said softly, while the people inside mocked me. "I have memorized their faces. And I have memorized yours, Daisy. I hope you feel better, Isabella," Daisy stammered, deeply intimidated by the men surrounding them. "Keep the coat," Daisy added, as Isabella began to shrug it off. "You need it more right now." Isabella smiled. It was a genuine, warm smile, but there was a terrifying edge of power behind it. She reached into a pocket and pulled out a heavy, dark, metallic business card. It was completely blank, save for a single phone number embossed in silver. "Call this number tomorrow at noon," Isabella said, pressing the card into Daisy's trembling hand. "Your kindness will not go unpaid." With that, Luca gently guided Isabella into the back of the armored SUV. The heavy doors slammed shut with a solid, vault-like thud. The engine roared, and the SUV peeled away into the night, disappearing into the Chicago snowstorm. Daisy stood shivering on the sidewalk, holding the blank metal card. The adrenaline was finally wearing off, leaving behind a cold, crushing reality. She was fired. She had zero income. Her sister's treatment was due on Friday. She walked back into the restaurant's employee entrance to pack her locker, tears of absolute terror and despair finally breaking through her stoic facade. She had no idea how she was going to survive the week. She also had no idea that she had just saved the mother of Dominic Moretti, the boss of the Chicago syndicate. And Dominic Moretti was a man who repaid his debts, both the good ones and the bad ones. The morning after the incident at Le Ciel, Daisy woke up to a reality colder than the frost coating her apartment window. Her bedroom in the rundown Pilsen neighborhood apartment was barely larger than a walk-in closet. The radiator hissed in the corner, offering a pathetic, rattling attempt at warmth that did nothing to chase away the chill seeping into her bones. She sat up, pulling the thin quilt tightly around her shoulders, and stared at the kitchen counter. There, illuminated by the harsh, grey morning light, sat a stack of envelopes. Most of them bore angry red stamps. Past due, final notice, immediate action required. But the most terrifying envelope wasn't red. It was a crisp, clinical white, bearing the logo of Chicago Memorial Hospital. Daisy pushed herself out of bed, her bare feet recoiling from the freezing linoleum floor, and walked over to the counter. She didn't need to open the envelope. She already knew the numbers by heart. $8,420. That was the remaining balance for her 16-year-old sister, Lily's immunosuppressant treatments. Lily had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder 2 years ago, right after their parents had passed away in a highway pileup. Since then, Daisy had been Lily's sole guardian, provider, and lifeline. She picked up her phone and opened her banking app. Available balance, $412.18. A wave of nausea washed over her. She gripped the edge of the cheap-for-mica counter, her knuckles turning white. Without the tips from Le Ciel, she couldn't even cover next month's rent, let alone Lily's medication, which was scheduled for Friday. It was Wednesday. She had exactly 48 hours to perform a financial miracle, or the hospital pharmacy would halt the dispensation. Her phone buzzed in her hand, startling her. The caller ID flashed Chicago Memorial Billing. Daisy took a deep, shaky breath and answered. "Hello. Miss Bennett." A dry, bureaucratic voice sounded through the speaker. "This is Brenda from Patient Accounts. We are calling to confirm the payment arrangement for Lily Bennett's Friday infusion." I need a few more days," Daisy stammered, hating the desperate tremor in her own voice. "I had an unexpected employment situation change last night. I can give you $400 today and the rest next week, please." "Miss Bennett, we've already extended your grace period twice," Brenda replied, devoid of any empathy. "Hospital policy is strict on specialty pharmacy items. If the balance of $8,400 is not cleared by Friday at 9 a.m., the treatment will be cancelled. I strongly suggest you find an alternative source of funding. Have a good day." The line clicked dead. Daisy slowly lowered the phone, tears finally breaking through her exhausted defenses. She slid down the front of the kitchen cabinets, burying her face in her hands, and cried until her chest ached. She had done the right thing. She had sacrificed everything to help a bleeding, helpless elderly woman. And this was her reward? Watching her sister suffer because the world punished kindness? After 10 minutes of silent weeping, her eyes fell upon the object sitting next to the pile of bills. It was the heavy, dark, metallic business card the old woman, Isabella, had given her. It looked entirely out of place on the chipped countertop. It caught the dim morning light, the single silver phone number gleaming like a beacon. "Call this number tomorrow at noon. Your kindness will not go unpaid." Daisy looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 11:45 a.m. Who was Isabella? Who were those terrifying, massive men in the armored SUV? A rational part of Daisy's brain screamed that she was dealing with dangerous people. Normal elderly women didn't have private security details that made general managers turn pale with terror. But Daisy was out of options. She wiped her eyes, stood up, and grabbed the card. The metal was strangely cold to the touch. She watched the clock tick down. At exactly 11:59 and 55 seconds, she dialed the number. As the clock struck 12 p.m., she pressed call. It didn't even ring. It was answered instantly on the first connection. "Miss Bennett," a smooth, impeccably professional male voice said. "We have been waiting for your call." Daisy froze. How do you know my name?" "My employer knows everything he needs to know about the people who interact with his family," the voice replied calmly. "You are instructed to look out your front window." Heart pounding against her ribs, Daisy walked to the living room window and pulled back the cheap plastic blinds. Parked illegally on the cracked pavement in front of her apartment building was a massive, pristine, black Maybach. Standing beside the rear door was a man in a tailored dark suit. When Daisy looked out, he looked up directly at her window and offered a brief, polite nod. "A car is waiting for you," the voice on the phone continued. "Please come downstairs. My employer wishes to speak with you." "Who is your employer?" Daisy asked, her voice tight with apprehension. "The man whose mother you saved last night, Please, Miss Bennet, do not keep him waiting. He is deeply eager to thank you in person." The line disconnected. Daisy stood staring at the black luxury car. It looked like a spaceship parked in a junkyard in her neighborhood. She threw on her only decent sweater, grabbed her keys, and walked out the door. She was walking into the unknown, but when you have nothing left to lose, fear loses its grip. The ride in the Maybach was completely silent. The driver didn't speak a word, and the thick, soundproof glass separated Daisy from the noise of the Chicago streets. She sank into the plush leather, watching the city transition from the gritty brick buildings of her neighborhood to the towering glass and steel monoliths of the downtown financial district. The car glided into a private underground parking garage beneath a massive skyscraper. Two heavily armed guards at a security checkpoint nodded as the Maybach approached, raising the barricade without asking for identification. Daisy was escorted out of the car by the driver and led toward a private, biometric-secured elevator. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "To the penthouse, Miss Bennet," the driver said smoothly. The elevator shot upward at a dizzying speed, making Daisy's ears pop. When the silver doors finally slid open, Daisy stepped out into a space that redefined the concept of wealth. If Le Ciel was a gaudy, desperate display of new money, this was something else entirely. It was an exercise in absolute, understated power. The penthouse spanned the entire top floor, featuring floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking, panoramic view of the Chicago skyline and the icy expanse of Lake Michigan. The floors were dark, polished mahogany, and the walls were adorned with what looked like original Renaissance paintings. Standing by the window, looking out over the city with his hands clasped behind his back, was a man. He slowly turned around as Daisy entered. He was in his late 30s or early 40s, tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a bespoke, charcoal three-piece suit that fit him with deadly precision. He had thick, dark hair, lightly dusted with silver at the temples, and a jawline that looked like it had been chiseled from granite. But it was his eyes that made Daisy stop in her tracks. They were the exact same stormy, piercing grey as Isabella's. But where Isabella's eyes held a hidden, quiet strength, this man's eyes radiated a cold, calculating, and terrifying authority. "Miss Bennet," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that commanded the air in the room. He didn't raise his voice, but Daisy felt the impact of it vibrating in her chest. "Yes," Daisy managed to say, forcing herself to stand tall despite her trembling knees. The man walked toward her. As he stepped into the light, Daisy noticed the faint, jagged scar running along his jawline. He stopped a few feet away, studying her with an intense, unblinking gaze. "My name is Dominic Moretti," he said, offering his hand. Daisy cautiously took it. His grip was firm, warm, and unapologetically dominant. "I believe you met my mother, Isabella, last night," Dominic continued, gesturing toward a pair of plush leather armchairs. "Please sit." Daisy sat on the edge of the seat, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Dominic took the chair opposite her, leaning forward slightly, resting his elbows on his knees. "My mother is the most important thing in this world to me, Miss Bennet," Dominic said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. "She built our family from nothing. She survived things that would break most men. Now, in her twilight years, she occasionally suffers from bouts of independence. She slips away from her security detail because she misses the days when she could simply walk the streets." He paused, a dark shadow crossing his face. "Last night, she slipped on the ice and stumbled into Le Ciel. And I understand that while she lay bleeding on the floor, the absolute scum of this city decided to mock her." Daisy swallowed hard. They thought she was homeless. They were cruel. Dominic's jaw clenched. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I have read the incident report compiled by my men. I know the names of the patrons who laughed. Eric and Beatrice Pendleton. Sylvia Sterling, the manager who fired you for showing basic human decency. He leaned back, his stormy eyes locking onto hers. But you, a woman struggling to survive, making minimum wage, risked your only source of income to pull off your own coat and wrap it around a stranger. You stood up to billionaires to defend my mother. She was hurt, Daisy whispered. I couldn't just leave her there. Dominic reached inside his suit jacket and pulled out a sleek, black leather folder. He placed it on the glass coffee table between them and slid it toward her. Open it, he commanded gently. Daisy hesitated, then reached out with trembling fingers and flipped the folder open. Inside were 2 pieces of paper. The first was a bank receipt. It was a transfer confirmation from an offshore account to Chicago Memorial Hospital. The amount paid was $8,420. Beneath it was a note from the billing department stating that Lily Bennett's account was paid in full for the next 5 years of treatment. Daisy gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Tears instantly sprang to her eyes, blurring the ink on the page. You paid Lily's bills? How did you know? I told you, Miss Bennett. I know everything about the people who touch my family, Dominic said, his face softening just a fraction. Consider your sister's medical expenses permanently handled. You will never receive another threatening phone call from a collection agency. That is a promise from the Moretti family. Daisy couldn't speak. She sobbed, a profound, crushing weight lifting off her chest. She looked at Dominic, seeing past the terrifying aura to the fiercely loyal son beneath. Thank you. God, thank you so much. You saved her life. No, Dominic corrected her, his voice firm. You saved my mother. I merely balanced the ledger. He reached out and tapped the second piece of paper in the folder. However, the ledger regarding Le Ciel remains unbalanced, Dominic said, his eyes darkening to the color of thunderclouds. The people in that restaurant insulted the blood of the Chicago syndicate. They humiliated Isabella Moretti. And for that, there must be a reckoning. Daisy looked at the second paper. It was a legal deed of ownership. At the top, bolded in black ink, were the words, Le Ciel Restaurant Group. I bought the building this morning, Dominic stated calmly, as if he were discussing the weather. I bought the restaurant, the holding company, and the debt of everyone involved. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, transforming back into the untouchable crime boss. He looked down at Daisy, a dangerous, predatory smile curving his lips. Get up, Miss Bennett. Go wash your face, and let my staff fit you for a new dress. A new dress? Daisy asked, confused and overwhelmed. Why? Dominic looked out the window toward the upscale district where Le Ciel was located. Because tonight, Dominic said, his voice cold and resolute, we are going to dinner. I want you to be sitting at the best table in the house when I tear their little kingdom to the ground. The transformation took less than 3 hours, but when Daisy looked in the floor-to-ceiling mirror of the penthouse's guest suite, she didn't recognize the woman staring back. Dominic's personal stylist, a sharp-eyed French woman named Genevieve, had worked with ruthless efficiency. Gone were the exhausted, pale features and the cheap, stained uniform of a desperate waitress. Daisy was now draped in a breathtaking midnight blue silk gown that fit her as if it had been woven directly onto her skin. Her hair was swept up into an elegant, classic twist, and a delicate diamond pendant borrowed from the Moretti family vault, rested against her collarbone. She looked like she belonged on the cover of a high-fashion magazine, not in a cramped, freezing apartment in Pilsen, but beneath the silk and diamonds, her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "You look exactly as you should," a deep voice rumbled from the doorway. Daisy turned to see Dominic standing there. He had traded his charcoal business suit for a pitch-black tuxedo, tailored to millimeter perfection. The faint scar on his jaw seemed more pronounced under the ambient lighting, a brutal reminder of the world he truly inhabited. He wasn't just a wealthy businessman. He was an apex predator who had clawed his way to the top of Chicago's underworld. "I feel like an imposter," Daisy admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Dominic, I'm just a waitress. If I walk back in there—" "You are not an imposter," Dominic interrupted smoothly, closing the distance between them. "The people in that restaurant, the ones who wear their wealth to mask their rotten souls, they are the imposters. Wealth is just a tool, Daisy. Character is what dictates your worth. Last night, you proved you have more character than everyone in that dining room combined." He offered his arm. "Tonight, you are under the protection of the Moretti family. No one will ever look down on you again." Daisy took a deep breath, the scent of his expensive smoky cologne grounding her. She slipped her arm through his. "Okay, let's go." The ride back to the upscale district was a stark contrast to Daisy's usual frantic subway commutes. The Maybach moved like a phantom through the snowy Chicago streets, flanked this time by 2 black SUVs. The syndicate did not travel lightly. As they pulled onto the pristine, salt-cleared street in front of Le Ciel, Daisy felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. The grand brass and oak doors loomed ahead, the crystal chandeliers blazing with the same arrogant light as the night before. The valet rushed forward, his eyes widening as the massive convoy boxed in the entire entrance, completely ignoring the fire lanes. Luca, the giant with the scarred eyebrow from the night before, stepped out of the lead SUV and opened the door for Dominic, giving Daisy a stiff, respectful nod as she emerged. "Right this way," Dominic murmured, guiding her up the icy marble steps. When the heavy front doors swung open, the blast of warm air carried the familiar scent of truffles, expensive wine, and old money. The dining room was packed to capacity. The low hum of elitist chatter filled the air, accompanied by the soft clinking of fine crystal. At the host stand stood Gregory, the maitre d'. He looked up, his rehearsed, snobby smile already forming. "Welcome to Le Ciel. Do you have a reza?" Gregory's voice completely died in his throat. The color drained from his face so fast he looked as though he might faint. He recognized the terrifying men flanking the entrance, and then his eyes landed on Dominic. But what truly short-circuited his brain was the woman on Dominic's arm. "See Daisy," Gregory stammered, his eyes bulging. "Good evening, Gregory," Daisy said. Her voice, usually soft and deferential, carried a new, icy composure. The silence that spread through the front of the restaurant was palpable. Waiters froze mid-step. Patrons nearest to the entrance turned to stare at the breathtaking couple, trying to calculate which foreign royal family or tech empire they belonged to. Suddenly, the sharp, aggressive clicking of high heels pierced the quiet. Sylvia Sterling, the general manager, marched out from the private dining alcove. Her face was set in a permanent scowl, ready to berate whoever was causing a bottleneck at the entrance. "Gregory, what is the hold-up? We have VIPs waiting." Sylvia stopped dead in her tracks. Her jaw practically hit the floor. She stared at Daisy's midnight blue gown, the diamonds, and then at the imposing, terrifying figure of Dominic Moretti. "Daisy," Sylvia hissed, her shock quickly morphing into furious indignation. "What on earth are you doing here? And where did you steal that dress? I told you last night you are permanently banned from this property. Security!" Two burly security guards began to approach, but Luca simply took half a step forward and crossed his massive arms. The guards took one look at Luca's dead, emotionless eyes and the visible bulge of a shoulder holster under his suit, and instantly backed away, suddenly pretending to inspect the coat rack. Dominic didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. "You must be Sylvia Sterling," he said, the baritone of his voice carrying just enough edge to make the hair on the back of Daisy's neck stand up. Sylvia puffed up her chest, trying to maintain her authority in a room where she was rapidly losing control. "I am the general manager of this establishment, and I demand to know who you are and why you have brought a disgruntled, terminated employee back into my restaurant." Dominic stepped forward, slowly reaching into the inner pocket of his tuxedo. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. "I am the man," Dominic said softly, pulling out a thick, legal document bound in heavy black leather, "who just bought your world." Dominic tossed the leather-bound folder onto the maitre d's podium. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "Open it, Sylvia," Dominic commanded. It wasn't a request. It was an order that brooked absolutely no defiance. Sylvia's hands were shaking as she flipped open the cover. Her eyes frantically scanned the bold legal text, the notarized stamps, and the undeniable signatures. Le Ciel Restaurant Group, acquired in full by Moretti Holdings, LLC. This is impossible," Sylvia whispered, her arrogant facade crumbling into genuine terror. She looked up at Dominic, her face ashen. "The ownership group would never sell. This is a legacy property." "Everyone has a price, Sylvia. And those who don't have a price have a vulnerability," Dominic replied coldly. "As of 9 a.m. this morning, I own the building, the brand, the liquor licenses, and the payroll, which means, as of right now, I am your boss." A collective gasp echoed from the nearby tables, who were openly eavesdropping. "And my first executive decision," Dominic continued, his stormy grey eyes locking onto Sylvia's panicked face, "is to inform you that you are fired. But not just fired. I have forwarded the security footage of you denying medical aid to an elderly woman to every hospitality group, news outlet, and regulatory board in the Midwest. You will never manage so much as a fast food drive-through for the rest of your miserable life." Sylvia stumbled backward, clutching her chest as if she had been shot. She looked at Daisy, desperate tears finally welling in her eyes. "Daisy, please. I was just following protocol. You know how demanding the clientele is." Daisy looked at the woman who had tormented her for 2 years, who had threatened her sister's livelihood, and felt nothing but pity. "Protocol doesn't excuse cruelty, Sylvia. You made your choice last night." "What is the meaning of this disruption?" A loud, arrogant voice boomed from the center of the dining room. Eric Pendleton, his face flushed with wine and self-importance, threw his napkin onto his table and stood up. Beside him, Beatrice Pendleton was glaring at the commotion with absolute disgust. "We are paying thousands of dollars for a peaceful evening," Eric shouted, marching toward the front. "I don't know who you think you are, buddy, but I am personal friends with the mayor. I want this vagrant waitress and whoever you are thrown out immediately, or I will have this place shut down." Dominic slowly turned his head to look at Eric. A deadly, chilling smile spread across Dominic's face. He let go of Daisy's arm and took slow, deliberate steps toward the billionaire real estate mogul. "Eric Pendleton," Dominic said, tasting the name like a bitter vintage. "CEO of Pendleton Properties. You specialize in aggressive acquisitions and driving low-income families out of their homes to build luxury condos. "I am a businessman," Eric sneered, though he instinctively took a step back as Dominic's towering frame cast a shadow over him. "And I demand you leave." "You are a coward who laughs at bleeding old women," Dominic corrected him softly. "Last night you called my mother trash when she fell on your precious marble floor." Eric's arrogant expression faltered. Your mother, Isabella Moretti," Dominic whispered, his voice dripping with venom. "And since you are a businessman, Eric, let's talk business. You financed your latest massive waterfront development through First Horizon Trust, did you not?" Eric's face went completely pale. How? How do you know my private financials?" "Because First Horizon Trust was over-leveraged," Dominic explained smoothly, loud enough for the entire silent dining room to hear. "They needed a massive influx of capital to avoid insolvency last quarter. I provided that capital. Through a series of proxy holding companies, my syndicate now owns a controlling interest in the bank, holding your loans." Beatrice Pendleton let out a horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her diamond-ringed hand. You're Dominic Moretti," Eric stammered, the realization hitting him like a freight train. The Chicago Syndicate, the untouchable family. He wasn't just talking to a wealthy man. He was talking to a ghost who controlled the city from the shadows. "And tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., Dominic continued, his eyes dead and unfeeling. "My bank is calling in the entirety of your loans, citing the morality clauses embedded in the fine print of your mezzanine debt structure. Since you do not have $300 million in liquid capital to pay it off, your assets will be seized. Your properties will be liquidated. By Friday, you will be utterly, completely bankrupt." "No!" Eric shrieked, his knees buckling. He practically collapsed against the edge of a table, shattering a crystal wine glass. "You can't do this. It was a joke. It was just a joke." "I don't find it funny," Dominic said flatly. He turned his back on the ruined billionaire and walked back to Daisy. The entire restaurant was in a state of absolute shock. The elite patrons, who just a day ago believed they were untouchable gods of the city, were now staring at their own plates, terrified to make eye contact with the man who had just destroyed a billionaire and a restaurant manager in under 5 minutes. Dominic gently took Daisy's hand again. He looked at the remaining staff, who were trembling in their aprons. "Clear table 4, Dominic ordered the terrified busboy Bradley. "Miss Bennett and I will be dining now." Yes, Mr. Moretti, right away," Bradley squeaked, rushing to clear the table that the Pendletons had just abandoned. Dominic led Daisy through the parted sea of silent, terrified diners. They sat at the best table in the center of the room, beneath the grandest chandelier. The power dynamic of the entire room had been permanently fractured and violently rearranged. Daisy looked across the table at Dominic. He poured her a glass of sparkling water, his demeanor completely calm, as if he hadn't just orchestrated the financial ruin of 2 powerful people. Was it too much? And she thought of the cruel, callous laughter that had filled this exact room 24 hours ago. "No," Daisy said quietly, a small, genuine smile finally breaking through her shock. "I think it was exactly the right amount of justice." Dominic raised his glass, to balancing the ledger. The rest of the dinner passed in a surreal, insulated bubble. The usually boisterous dining room of Le Ciel remained dead silent. Waiters moved like ghosts, terrified to make a sound, while the city's elite ate their lukewarm food without a single complaint, their eyes firmly fixed on their plates. Dominic Moretti had not just bought a restaurant, he had conquered a room full of Chicago's most arrogant power players without firing a single shot. When Dominic finally placed his linen napkin on the table, Luca immediately materialized to pull back Daisy's chair. "Come, Daisy," Dominic said softly, offering his hand. "There is one last piece of business we must attend to tonight." Daisy took his hand, her midnight blue silk gown brushing against the marble floor as they walked toward the exit. She didn't look back at Sylvia, who was quietly sobbing near the coat check, or at Eric Pendleton, who looked like a hollowed-out shell of a man. They stepped out into the biting winter air, the heavy doors of the restaurant closing on Daisy's old life forever. Inside the Maybach, the heat was turned up, wrapping Daisy in a comforting embrace. She expected the driver to head back toward her rundown apartment in Pilsen, but instead, the convoy merged onto the expressway, heading straight for the medical district. "Where are we going?" Daisy asked, a sudden spike of panic tightening her chest. "Is it Lily? Did the hospital call?" "Lily is fine," Dominic assured her, his stormy grey eyes softening in the dim light of the cabin. "Better than fine, actually. But there is something you need to see. Something my mother wanted to tell you herself." 10 minutes later, the Maybach pulled up to the grand, brilliantly lit entrance of Chicago Memorial Hospital, but they didn't go through the chaotic emergency room doors or the crowded main lobby. Instead, Luca escorted them to a private, biometric elevator reserved exclusively for the hospital's board members and VIP donors. The doors opened on the top floor, the private recovery wing. The sterile, harsh fluorescent lights of the lower floors were replaced here by warm, ambient sconces, thick carpets, and absolute silence. Dominic led Daisy down the wide corridor and stopped outside room 401. He gently pushed the heavy oak door open. Daisy gasped, bringing her hands to her mouth. The hospital room looked more like a suite at a five-star hotel. There were massive floral arrangements, a velvet sofa, and a breathtaking view of the city skyline. But what made Daisy freeze were the two people inside the room. Sitting up in the state-of-the-art bed, looking more vibrant and energetic than she had in 2 years, was her 16-year-old sister, Lily. She was laughing. Sitting in a plush armchair right beside the bed, holding Lily's hand, was Isabella Moretti. Isabella was no longer wearing the moth-eaten wool coat. She was dressed in an elegant, tailored emerald suit, her silver hair perfectly coiffed. When she saw Daisy, her sharp grey eyes lit up with genuine warmth. "Daisy!" Lily squealed, her eyes wide as she took in her older sister's glamorous appearance. "You look like a movie star. What is going on? Isabella said you two are friends." Daisy rushed to the bed, throwing her arms around her sister, tears of overwhelming relief spilling down her cheeks. "Are you okay, Bug? How are you feeling?" "I feel amazing," Lily beamed. "The nurses here are incredible, and Isabella brought me a bucket of real gelato." Daisy pulled back and looked at Isabella, utterly bewildered. "Isabella, I don't understand. Why are you here? Dominic already paid for everything. You didn't have to do this." Isabella slowly stood up, leaning slightly on a silver-handled walking cane. She walked over to Daisy and gently cupped her face. "My sweet girl," Isabella said, her voice rich with emotion. "When I asked for your name last night, and you told my men it was Daisy Bennett, my son ran a background check to ensure you were properly compensated. Do you know what he found?" Daisy shook her head, her heart pounding. Isabella looked back at Dominic, who stepped into the room, his towering presence filling the space. He walked to the foot of Lily's bed and looked at the two sisters. "Your father was Thomas Bennett," Dominic stated. It wasn't a question. Daisy swallowed hard. "Yes, he was a paramedic. He and my mum, they passed away in a highway pile-up 2 years ago." Dominic's jaw tightened. 14 years ago, on the night of October 14th, my family was ambushed on the south side. It was a brutal, chaotic night. I was 26 years old, and I took 2 bullets to the chest. My own men were pinned down. The police wouldn't enter the zone. I was bleeding out on the asphalt, minutes away from death. He paused, the memory casting a dark shadow over his features. An ambulance broke through the barricades, Dominic continued, his voice dropping to a reverent whisper. A paramedic ignored the gunfire, sprinted into the alley and dragged me into his rig. He kept his hands inside my chest, compressing an artery all the way to the trauma center. He saved my life, Daisy. That paramedic's name tag read T. Bennett. Daisy's breath hitched. She remembered her father coming home that night, covered in blood, refusing to talk about what had happened on his shift. He had always been a quiet hero. When I recovered, I tried to find him, Dominic said. But your father had requested an unlisted transfer to protect his family from syndicate retaliation. By the time my network tracked him down, the accident on the highway had already happened. I was too late to repay my debt to the man who gave me my life. Isabella took Daisy's trembling hands. Last night, when I fell, I was surrounded by the richest, most powerful people in this city. They watched me bleed. But Thomas Bennett's daughter, working for minimum wage, exhausted and struggling, threw away her livelihood to save a stranger. You have your father's heart, Daisy. We protect our own, Dominic said, stepping forward. He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on Daisy's shoulder. And the Bennetts are owed a debt of blood and honor by the Moretti family. Lily's treatments are not just paid for. She is being transferred tomorrow to the Covington Institute of Autoimmune Research in Maryland, the premier private facility in the country. They have a 90% remission rate for her specific condition. Daisy broke down, sobbing uncontrollably as she hugged her sister. The crushing, suffocating weight of the past 2 years, the debt, the fear, the grueling shifts, the terror of losing her only family, evaporated into the warm air of the hospital room. You don't have to work 80-hour weeks anymore, Daisy, Isabella whispered, stroking her hair. You don't have to carry the weight of the world alone. Your father saved my son. You saved me. Now, let us take care of you. For the first time since her parents died, Daisy looked out the window at the glowing Chicago skyline and didn't feel terrified of the future. She had walked into a restaurant as a struggling waitress, invisible and entirely alone. She was walking out as the most protected woman in the city, holding the hand of the sister who was finally going to live. Sometimes, the universe tests us in the most unexpected ways. Daisy Bennett had absolutely nothing to gain and everything to lose when she dropped to her knees to help a bleeding stranger. She chose empathy over her own survival, utterly unaware that her simple act of kindness was about to trigger a massive reckoning for the arrogant elite, and unearth a 14-year-old debt of honor that would save her sister's life. It just goes to show, true character isn't defined by the clothes you wear or the money in your bank account, but by how you treat the most vulnerable people in the room when you think no one is watching, because you never know who is holding the ledger. Did this story of justice and karma give you chills? If you loved seeing arrogant billionaires get exactly what they deserved, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that kindness always comes back around. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss out on our next real-life drama. Let us know in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Daisy's shoes?